All right, today we are finally moving on to our first new topic of the year. We're going to be talking about integers and something that you've probably seen a little bit in the past of absolute value. And there's just a couple of quick definitions I want to make sure that you understand. And the first one is what an integer actually is. An integer is a type of number. It's a kind of number. So when we talk about integers, we're talking about a certain group of numbers that have a specific characteristic. And the easiest way to look at integers is they're really counting numbers. When you first started learning about numbers, you learned about numbers that we called natural numbers. And this was a group of numbers that you started working with when you were really young. There was like numbers 1 and 2 and 7 and 28. These were all natural numbers. There were no decimals, there were no fractions. They were just numbers that little kids used to count. And then as you got a little bit older, we made this group bigger and we called it whole numbers. And really all we did was actually add one number. It's still 1, 2, 7, 28, all of those counting numbers. Those are all whole numbers as well. But the whole number group, we just added one number, and that was 0. And now we're going to make that number group a little bit bigger. Rather than just dealing with 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 107,320 and 0, we're going to make the group a little bit bigger. And we're going to call the new group integers. And just like natural numbers and whole numbers, integers are 1, 2, 7, 28, and 0. But we also add in the negative numbers. We add in -1 and -2 and -7 and -28. So the way that we define that is that integers are whole numbers, they're opposites, meaning 1 and -1, and they can also be 0. That's all an integer is. So if you ever see what's the closest integer, all you're doing for is looking for the closest number. No decimals, no fractions. Okay? So that's kind of just a quick little visual for you. Hopefully help you understand integers just a little bit better. Now, one of the ways that you're going to be using this, well, basically this entire school year, we're introducing you to integers and how they affect math. All of a sudden, these negative numbers that we haven't really used a lot of before are going to pop up in everything that you've already learned. And they kind of change some of the rules, they move things around. So one of the things that we want to start with is just making sure that you understand how to order negative numbers and how to compare them to other negative numbers. In the past, comparing numbers has been really easy. If I ask you what's bigger, 5 or 7, you know that 7 comes after 5. So that makes it a bigger number. But we need to be careful with negative numbers because when we look at them on the number line, right here we have 0, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And something that you need to change your thinking about this year is that bigger doesn't mean that the number is necessarily bigger. Bigger means that it is further to the right on the number line. Okay, so when we're ordering and comparing, if it's to the right, that means it is greater. It's greater than. If it's to the left, that means it is less than. Okay, now that doesn't mean that everything to the left of 0 is less than. What if we're comparing two numbers that are less than 0? For example, what if we're comparing -4 and we want to compare that to -8? We've got two numbers, we want to figure out what goes in the middle. Well, -4, how does it compare to -8? -4 is right here, and -8 is to the left of -4. So we're going to look at -4, and the way we're going to read this is that -4 is what compared to -8? That's what we're looking for in the middle. -4 is it to the left or is it to the right of -8? So we've got -4 here, -8 down here somewhere. So -4 is to the right of negative 8, which means it's greater than because it's further up the number line. So negative 4 would be greater than negative 8. Okay? So really, I think the only time you're going to get a little bit confused is when you've got two negatives that you have to compare. If you're comparing a positive number and a negative number, that's easy. A positive is always greater than a negative number. Always. Because the positives are all to the right of 0. Negatives are all to the left. So if I want to compare negative 1 and 1, well, let's do it the other way around. Let's compare 1 to negative 1. 1 is always to the right of negative 1. It's always greater than negative 1 because 1 is greater than all negative numbers. And I think right here is the only time you're going to get confused a little bit. So if it helps, think about the number line and read it. Negative 4 is to the right of negative 8. So that means the arrow points to the right. That means it's bigger than negative 8. So let's jump down here really quick to these comparison problems. We'll come back to absolute value in just a minute. So right here we have negative 2, and we're comparing it to negative 1, but we've got these bars on the outside. So I guess we better not skip absolute value because we're going to use those in the example. These bars on the outside, if you remember, that means absolute value. And this is a review topic from last year, hopefully. What absolute value means is how far this number is from 0. So up here at the top under absolute value, if you want to write this on these pages of notes, absolute value means how far the number is from 0. So absolute value is a distance, how far something is from 0, and distances are always positive. They're never negative. So here's the trick to absolute values. All you have to do is get rid of the negative number on the inside. That's it. That's all we're doing. So when we find the absolute value of 7, these lines mean absolute value. The absolute value of 7, there is no negative on the inside. And we know that 7 is 7 away from 0. So absolute value of 7 is just 7. Looking at number 2, the absolute value of negative 1, how far away is negative 1 from 0? If we look at 0, negative 1 is 1 away, and the shortcut is just get rid of the negative sign, 1. Number 3, how far away is negative 5 from 0? What's the absolute value of negative 5? So again, we can count. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's one way to do it. Or just get rid of the negative sign. Okay, an absolute value is always positive. Now be careful, because right here, absolute value of 14. Some of you are going to write that it's negative 14. That's not true. The opposite of 14 is negative 14. But I don't want the opposite. I want the absolute value, which is always positive. So never, ever, ever put a negative number when you've got the absolute value here. So the absolute value of 14 is just 14. All right? So now let's compare two numbers. Now we know what absolute value means, and we're going to compare the absolute value of negative 2, and we're going to compare that to negative 1. So first of all, let's get rid of the absolute value. Negative 2 is 2 away from 0. Or, again, I just drop the negative sign, and I want to compare that to negative 1. So I'm comparing a positive number to a negative number. 2 is right here, and it's to the right of negative 1. So I'm going to put to the right. 2 is greater than negative 1. And then if I jump over here, negative 7 compared to the absolute value of 6. Again, don't just write the opposite. It's not negative 6. 6 is only 6 away from 0. There's no negative sign, so it stays the same. So negative 7 compared to 6. Negative 7 is over here, and it's to the left of 6, because 6 is on this side. So negative 7 is to the left of 6. So my arrow is going to point to the left because negative 7 is smaller. All right, 30 seconds. We'll get these ordered from least to greatest really quick, and then we will have you go ahead and get started on trying some of these on your own. Absolute value of negative 34. It wants the smallest numbers listed first and then the greatest. And what we want to be careful of is let's change these to another form so that we know exactly what the answers are. So absolute value of negative 34, I just get rid of the negative sign. It's 34 away from 0. So there's one of my numbers. and then I have 21, and then I have negative 17. Absolute value of 20 is just 20. And then the absolute value of negative 11. Again, I get rid of the negative sign, so my answer is 11. So now I can put these in order. And when I do, I'm going to actually write down the original version of them. So when I look at these numbers, the one furthest to the left is the least. And that one's going to be negative 17. So I'm going to write negative 17 first. And then now that I've used that one, I'll cross it off. And then I've got 11, 20, 21, and 34. Well, and that's the order they go in. 11 is the next smallest, but I want to write it in its old form. So absolute value of negative 11 is next. So we've used that one. Now we've got 20, 21, 34. So the absolute value of 20, because I'm going to write it in the original form. And now I've got 21 or 34, excuse me. And obviously 21 is smaller than 34. So we write that one first. And then 34 comes next, but I'm going to use the original version of it. So negative 17, absolute value of negative 11, 20, 21, and the absolute value of negative 34. So I know I went really quick, just a quick introduction to kind of what we're doing this week, our first new topic. So go ahead, pause the video. I want you to try these problems over here on your own. When you think you have them done, come show them to me. Let me double check your work, and we'll let you get on with the practice. Good luck.